Hello everyone and welcome to the Charlton Morris offices in Leeds today for our webinar, which is all about cutting recruitment costs and keeping top talent using data. So today we're going to be talking about how integrating data into your talent function is a super impactful way of saving and making more money as a business through your people and talent functions. But without further ado, we'll start off with some introductions. So me first. So I'm Kris, Holland, Director of CM Marketing and Insights here at Charlton Morris. My team and I work closely with our clients to design their talent attraction and talent strategy plans. We do that through our in-house data team and marketing agency before our recruitment teams get to work doing what they do best. But I'm joined by two phenomenal guests. So first of all, thanks and hi. How are you both?
Hi, very well.
Right.
Well, I'm wondering who these guests
Yeah,
are.
they're going to come in a minute, aren't they?
Yeah. So we've got Matt Phelan, CEO of the Happiness Index, and Lisa Lister, co-founder of Culco. But Matt, do you want to just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Of course, thank you. I suppose the first thing of note about me is I'm a dad. That's the most important thing. That's my most important role. Co-founder and co-CEO. One of the things that people freaks out about my job description at the Happiness Index is one, it's happiness. So we'll get into how that's not fluffy today. And secondly, I share the CEO role with two other people. So we have three people doing the CEO role. So, but both are important to me. But we'll definitely get into how happiness is not necessarily a fluffy metric and actually extremely important to the stuff that you mentioned in the intro.
Great. And the Happiness Index, what is it, the Happiness Index?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should have explained that.
That's all right.
So we partner with Charlton Morris. We measure employee engagement and happiness. To give everyone the sort of difference between it, employee engagement is a traditional method that people measure. It's what you think about work, whereas employee happiness is what you feel about work. And both are going to be relevant to later questions, but it's a platform where you log in and you understand how all your employees think and feel. And I would describe it as emotional intelligence on scale. If your organization's less than 20 people, you probably should know how everyone's feeling. But companies get bigger than that. I think you said earlier, Charlton Morris is like 120 people.
Yeah.
So like once you get to that point, you can't suddenly know everyone's name. You don't know what everyone's up to. So getting a bit of help from technology helps do all the things that we're going to talk about later around retaining and attracting talent.
Yeah. Perfect. And Lisa, hello.
Hello.
Tell us a bit about yourself and Culco.
Yeah, of course. So myself and my co-founders started Culco after COVID, after the pandemic. We've been working with businesses now for sort of 20 years and a lot of SME businesses in various sectors, and we found a massive shift after COVID in terms of the business owners and their attitude towards culture, and really recognising the need for it even more if they hadn't before, which in some sectors they were definitely further behind, I would say, in that journey. So our intention is to take a really pragmatic approach and help any business of any size in any sector craft a culture program that then does lead to kind of all the good things we're going to talk about today: recruitment, retention, productivity, happiness, generally all the positives that come out of having a well-resourced, invested, committed to culture program.
Perfect. So I think it's important to say at this point, we're going to sort of be covering the talent function or the talent solution piece and splitting it up into a couple of parts. So we've got the bit before people join the business, and then we've got the bit after people join the business. So, how do we bring people in? How do we make people want to work for us? And then how do we keep them? And then how that informs it. And I think what's brilliant about having you two here is that we've got, Matt, the work that you guys do with the Happiness Index is helping you acquire and then interpret that data. But then Lisa, it's that culture piece, and it's really that practical interpretation, isn't it? And the use of it as opposed to
application of it. We've got to apply it.
Perfect. Cool. So first question is, why is it important for your talent strategy to be informed by data? Matt.
Okay, I think if we talk about what happens a lot in businesses, the person who is paid the most in the business often has the most important opinion. And that, I'm not going to get in whether that's a good or a bad thing, but one person's opinion is one data point. So that's still valid, whoever that's from, that's their lived experience, that is a useful point of reference. But where data is really important is you get everyone's opinion, and then you can put it together to create the full story. So if you're not collecting, sometimes people, maybe like myself, you might have been bad at maths at school. So when you hear the word data, you're like, oh, I don't want to do that data thing. And sometimes people think it's like the opposite to creativity, and that they should never come together. But really all it is it's you take all of those stories and you turn them from anecdotes into really powerful information to make better decisions. And I think I just want to bust one myth before we get into this, which is, have you heard that saying, if you can measure it, you can manage it?
Mm-hmm.
So I used to love that saying because I've worked in data for a long time now, but I think now it's better to look at data from this question point of view. If you can measure it, you can better understand it. If you can better understand it, you can make better decisions. So data is not there to like say that one person who was just making the decisions on their point of view should be like retired. It's just meaning that when the person still makes that decision, they've got a more informed decision, and that's all data does.
Yeah.
And I think that's all I'm just trying to bring that to the audience for.
But to go back to your earlier point, when, right at the start, we just said that there, where you said that, as a company gets bigger, you're not going to know everybody's names. You're not going to do that. Then, maybe when you are a 1-person or a 2-person or a 3-person company, then the person who does get paid the most and founded the business, maybe their opinion did have the most weight and that mattered, but surely that dilutes, doesn't it, over time when you've got 50, 60, 70, 500 people to...
Yeah, and you see that in all those programs like Undercover CEO and stuff, that you like when, I don't know, let's pick retail, someone goes and works in a shop and they've not worked in a shop for like 5 years and they actually see the challenges. That's again, if you go and do that, you're picking up a few stories on that day. Data will give you all of that story of what it's like on the front line for someone, which means you can make the decisions that need to be made.
Yeah. And Lisa, with regard to that culture piece as well, how does data fit into that from a talent strategy perspective?
I think if you sort of simplify everything, at its core, what a business owner or what a business wants is you want to retain your staff because you've put all that effort into the beginning process of kind of the talent acquisition and getting them. So you want that retention, and therefore you want them to be happy. Those things kind of go hand in hand. But then you also want, presumably, in most cases, the strategic growth to be achieved. That's generally, not always, but generally that's why people are in business. And so it's you've got to know what's working, and you've got to be able to measure what's working in order to be able to keep those people and to have got the people that are going to achieve the very best outcome for your business in the shape and form that you've decided you want it to be. So it's got to link with strategy. But ultimately, if you don't invest in the bit up front, you're gonna leak people at the back end, basically.
Yeah, it's like you said, Matt. It's about not being scared of the word, not being scared of the prospect of, we're not going to be, when we're talking about data in this context, we're not talking about learning binary and coding and things like that. We're literally talking about speaking to people and then using their answers, their thoughts, their feelings as the benchmarks and the foundations for what else we're doing, which informs everything we do. Yeah. Business.
Yeah, and it's trying to get the data that the happiness index that is actually around, you said emotional intelligence, around emotions and feelings, which is potentially harder data to collate than some of the statistical data of some of the figures that people may have focused on prior to kind of companies like yours coming along.
And I think on Lisa's point, I think one of the problems here is businesses fear emotions. So many of us, I was given this as negative feedback once, I was too emotional. Right. Now, lots of people have had that feedback, and it's something that we're told not to be at work. But we, as human beings, we are emotional beings. So if we stunt all that emotion out, we're actually not allowing our employees to get to their full potential. So actually, when we make decisions as human beings, quite often they're not always rational decisions. And where you go and work has one of the biggest impacts on your life. But you don't necessarily, if you think about it in someone's personal life, when they meet a partner, they don't write a list down. Well, some people do. So. But most people don't write a list down of like 10 checkpoints and then they check them off and then they select their partner. In the same way with a job, there's going to be hygiene stuff that you're going to want to know, like, does it pay the right salary and all this kind of stuff. But if you're faced with two choices, some of that decision is going to be emotional based on how you feel about it. Like Lisa and I, we're at the Charlton Morris office today in Leeds. And it's amazing here, all the little finer details that the effort that people put into things, that when you come here to bring the listeners into the room a bit, you get that kind of feeling that, okay, these guys know what they're doing because all the little details are taken care of. But that's an emotional sense that I've got. I've not gone around with a checklist and went, okay, yeah, they've cleaned the glasses and all this kind of stuff. It's just something that builds up over time. And understanding that emotional point is really important when you define the strategy.
And that's really interesting, because I think often data can be seen as an absence of emotion, but in actual fact, it allows you to, it allows you to make intelligent decisions that play into people's emotional states in a more effective way, doesn't it?
It translates really. A lot of business owners are kind of psychometrically, kind of say they're the blues, if you like, evidence-led, data-driven. It's a scary world if we are just talking about feelings that we can't kind of put into any pattern or structure or context. So to be able to take emotional data and then give it structure, that's like a comfort blanket almost. That makes it translatable into the boardroom, that then they can make the right decisions.
And without getting everyone switching off from LinkedIn, it's where you're combining qualitative and quantitative data. And when you bring those two together, because on Lisa's point, what people fear is unstructured data, which is emotions. But there's technology, that's why the happiness index is built. There's technology now that there's artificial intelligence that allows you to do that, put it in a dashboard. As a CEO, you can read it and have a look at it. Like, there's technology out there, let's let it help us.
Yeah, it demystifies everything, doesn't it?
And we know that, you know, the going back to the title of this session, you know, talking about cutting costs, and we know that there's a direct impact on reduced costs, more efficient hiring processes, impactful employer brands, ability to create amazing environments through harnessing this. So that the impacts, you know, going back to that boardroom you mentioned, Lisa, is huge. So, you know, the next step from that question is, how could data be used to inform your talent strategy and talent attraction? So that first piece, you know, how do you think that they could use data to inform that first bit of getting people in?
So I think, again, it's just collecting all those stories. So I'm going to put you in the spotlight a little bit, but you've been here 9 years.
Yeah.
So we had a chat offline about the fact you've been here 9 years. Now, the first bit of data that if I was Charlton Morris that I'd want to understand is the people that are here and are staying here, why are they staying here? Because there's some beautiful stories in there that once we collect that, we can start building it into strategy. So again, that I only know you from here, which has given me one piece of story, but let's collect that from the 120 people that are here. And then that's information that we can start to build in. I read a stat this morning when we were preparing for this. 30% of people leave before their probation period's up.
Right.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? Like, if you, just to put it in like the real world, if you were having a dinner party, you were organising regular dinner parties and 30% of people didn't come back, you would start
You'd wonder about your starters, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But that is collecting data. You'd collect data like, why are people not coming back? And it's the same at work. So just getting into these little stories, but then grouping them in and getting themes out, that's when you start to understand it. And then you can work out what you build on in the strategy. Does that help?
Absolutely. One thing that I must say as well at this point is thank you to everybody who's watching this. We've got people tuned in via Zoom. We've got other people watching us on LinkedIn Live. We're going to have room at the end for questions. So please do get your questions in via the Q&A, and we'll be getting to them and answering them, hopefully in any way that we can. So back to that. I mean, and I suppose I talked a little bit about talent strategy, and what I meant about talent strategy was that first step. So, you know, using data and using insights that are out there to make intelligent hiring decisions before you start to hire. Lisa, we were chatting earlier about how, you know, companies will have significant roles that they need to hire for at a very early stage, but it's a little bit of a like finger in the air job sometimes as to the what and the, you know, the what and the where and the why, isn't it, as to how we do that. You know, how do you think in those situations that companies could use this data piece to make more intelligent decisions?
Yeah, when we were talking, I was saying that quite a lot of the SMEs that I work with don't necessarily have huge skill sets in people or HR. And then therefore it often falls to the directors who would completely admit it's out of their comfort zone to then be talking about the people in HR. So kind of linking in with what Matt was saying, if we can really, if you, a company like yourself can really help them to get under the skin and understand what does a happy employee, a happy productive employee look like, then it's going to be an awful lot easier to craft kind of the talent that they're looking for the growth, and, you know, depending on the kind of type of growth that they want, and also the kind of whole shape of the company. I remember we worked at Culco with a company who really did want to, a lot of companies fit into this bracket, they wanted to employ more female staff on more of a shop floor manufacturing industry, engineering environment, and they were really struggling to recruit females. And tiny bits of data that say that if your job adverts have everything stated in terms of attainment and qualifications, then men will apply if they only can do 60% of those bullet points, and women will think that they need to have 100% before they even think they can apply.
Yep.
So maybe even at the kind of, before you even kind of sit down and put that advert out there, you need to think, okay, maybe I need to focus more on the values and the attributes and the personality types and things that aren't maybe just the bullet points, got this qualification, got that experience. If you want more females, and when they just adjusted, tiny tweak, cost nothing, adjusted the way they approached their recruitment, suddenly the women were applying. They got the nice mix on the shop floor. All the dynamics changed. All the positives of having a mixed workforce came from just that was a data point that they acted upon and worked.
It's a perfect example of a really practical data point that can be used. We often see companies who are approaching this strategic talent plan for maybe the first time or taking it seriously for the first time.
Yeah.
And it is like, they'll say, right, our talent strategy now is to do the exact same things we were doing, but we want to hire more women, or we want to hire people with different protected characteristics, that we want to hang in, but they're doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like that data point is, well, let's take a step back from it. Let's analyze the size of the talent pool. Let's be representative of the communities that we're hiring from. And if we want to be representative of the community we're hiring from, they might not have that practical skill set from a medical device perspective. But okay, well, let's deprioritize that. Let's prioritize the soft skills, get fantastic people in who add loads of value from that diversity, and then we can go from that. But yeah, exactly.
Parts.
Yeah, but without the data, you don't know the lay of the land to kick off with.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, did you have anything to add to that?
The only bit which is the bit of a trap, which is the cultural fit point.
Yeah, right.
Because a lot of companies, the first thing they do with the happiness index, they take something called a cultural assessment. So it gives them a readout of their culture. So they'll see, okay, this is what our culture looks like. This is the shape. And then they can take that data, and then they'll try and go, okay, let's hire for this fit.
Mm-hmm.
But what that means is you just reinforce and do exactly what you were just saying. You hire the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
So there is huge value in understanding what your culture is now. But I would just change cultural fit to cultural add, which means you go, right, this is the culture, and you get a bit, using the food analogy again, a bit like, how are we going to bring people in that are going to add to this culture, and how are they going to just increase the mix, the diversity, the changes, all that kind of stuff, and then you just start looking at everything as a blend and thinking, right, how is it all going to work? But until you've pictured that and taken the data, it's difficult to know even what you are, because again, if you ask 10 people, they may say a different thing, but if you ask everyone, then at least you know what the culture is like.
And that, that asking people, I suppose that's a real measure of culture, isn't it? As the real culture expert here, but asking different people and getting the same answer but from all different backgrounds and walks of life and things is...
Yeah, I don't know how you can do it otherwise, really. And when we were talking earlier, you mentioned, far too many assumptions are made from one person's, often say the phrase looking through a lens, often if you've got the same type of people around the board table all looking through the same lens or making assumptions, it's a recipe for disaster, really. It's not going to be accurate. So you've got to ask, and I've got to ask more than once. You've got to ask at various points in the journey. But I really like that point that you just made then about it's not fit into a kind of compartmentalize into this clone, the add and enhance and improve, and the kind of rich diversity, what that kind of gives in addition.
And a culture moves, and a culture evolves, and a culture keeps changing. It's not like this is a box you fit into. It's a wiggly line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very wiggly. Yeah.
Culture is a wiggly line. That's a takeaway quote. Conscious of the fact as well that we want to, I've just mentioned there, utilising data from that strategy and attraction perspective. Really want to give some practical points. So just there's a few notes that I had from here before about places where you can maybe get some data points to help inform strategy from those talent pools. Things like free to access salary data, census data, the economic situation, cost of living. They're all helpful for that piece, but also just general social media and taking the temperature of, what people are talking about, the way people are feeling about things and the way people are thinking about these things is, if you are someone watching this in a HR talent role and it's a case of where do we start, then they're all just easy places to go. But look, we'll move on to the next question, which is all about how, when we've got people in, then how do we keep our people using data? And this is obviously right in the
this is us every day. I think we talked about doing a cultural assessment, understanding where you are, but you should be measuring across the entire employee cycle, onboarding, exit, through key significant moments. So you'll, again, to pick on you, Kris, you've been here 9 years, 10 years is coming up, right? That will be in your head a big moment. So again, I'm not speaking to everyone at Charlton Morris, but someone here needs to get that right. That's like a decade of your career, and some moments are more significant than others because the time that you've been here 9.5 years is different to the day you've been here 10 years. Just like I think there was an example at Manchester City a few years ago where Manchester City forgot the captain's birthday. And he got upset because he didn't get a birthday cake. I think it was Yaya Toure.
It was, yeah.
So we can laugh about that.
Yeah.
Because we can go, oh, there's a footballer who's on £200,000 a week, all that kind of stuff. But again, that's the difference between a rational and an emotional. We are emotional beings. So someone can go, oh, Yaya Toure was on £200,000 a week or whatever it was. He shouldn't care about that. But that's the emotional core instinct that goes back to when we're children, that someone celebrates our birthday and it stops a job being transactional.
But you flip it around and you flip it around and you think like, well, hang on. He's on £200,000 a week and he still cares about that. Yeah. That must be really important.
Exactly. And
who doesn't like a Colin the Caterpillar?
But again, just to simplify and answer your question, it's just tracking the data throughout the whole employee experience. And the only other point I would add is just remember power dynamics. So we talked about asking people's opinions, but if you're the CEO and you're male and you go and ask all the women what it's like in this company to be here if you have a child, there's a power dynamic that comes in play where you might not necessarily get the truthful answer. And no matter how open and chilled and modern you are as a CEO, then people need to build a feedback in an anonymous way, because whatever that power dynamic is, or whoever you're speaking to, whatever part of it is, some people are going to feel threatened or intimidated and tell you what you want to hear. And the bigger the company gets, the worse that gets. So anonymity and allowing people to feedback anonymously is really important.
Just on that as well, just in terms of, and I think I'll come back to you on the cultural perspective of this in a sec, but being anonymous and doing the surveys anonymously is one thing, but what about the question of when? Because I think that, it was in a conversation on another episode of Bring It In that we were chatting about somebody, and where they were talking about doing their employee surveys. And when, well, I won't put words in your mouth. When do you think the best time to ask, to survey people is on their happiness is?
When it's right for them.
Right, okay.
Not when it's right for you.
Right.
So sometimes people approach us, retailers, not picking on retailers. I think I've done that twice today. And they'll say, I want to start a survey, but we're not doing it at Christmas because everyone's going to be really stressed.
Yeah.
Like there's an argument you should do it at Christmas.
But that was sort of my question. Yeah. Is that, should you ask people when they're at their lowest?
Yeah.
Because then that's when you'll get the most, or is that...
Our most sophisticated clients do it 24/7.
Right.
So it flips round. If you think about marketing used to be like one way and now it's two ways because of social media, getting how someone feels needs to be a way. So we have a product called Employee Voice 24/7. People can feedback negative, positively, anything that they want. But just by having those different products, like where you're doing an audit, like a cultural assessment, you might do that every 6 months. But having a product like Employee Voice just means people can feedback whenever they want.
Right.
And it makes such a big difference because, and also in that, it's really important to remember high happiness doesn't mean good and low happiness doesn't mean bad. Because that's what we would call that is toxic positivity.
Right.
Your emotions are supposed to go up and down in a day. And if employees are consistently, emotions are going down because of a particular reason, that's good for you to know. Mm. And then someone like Lisa can help you fix that. That's how it works. So it's just data and intelligence. If for whatever reason, when everyone arrived here, they couldn't get in the front door for 5 minutes, that would be annoying everyone.
Yeah.
And you just fix it. Sometimes the stuff that's really annoying people in your organization is so much simpler than you will have ever imagined until you collect the information.
And when it comes to that cultural piece, then, so say we've got our organisation, we've got a good lay of the land now, whereby we've got data and information as to how people are feeling. Then what are the next steps into then interpreting that data and making something of it?
I suppose one of the useful things from tools like Maps is to be able to get those trends and to start seeing certain indicators, so that you can try to avert if there's more effort and attention needed in particular teams, which is possibly down to the kind of team leaders often, or the managers, or certain offices or certain jurisdictions and territories. There's going to be all that kind of, the way you sort of slice it is going to be different. But if you can start to see a trend that's dipping, then you can kind of try to work out why. You can also work on the kind of best practice element of why are certain teams really thriving. What is it that those teams or those leaders in this team's doing? And let's pick those and translate those across other parts of the business, kind of drop it in. So I think you're right. I remember we once had doing masterclass for Culco, and it's kind of obvious that, of course, happiness cannot just keep going up and up and up. Like, where does it end? It's, we can't all walk around like some sort of jumping beans, positive and happy all the time. So it's got to have that kind of undulation, and not take that as criticism at board level or at leadership level. Yeah. But actually more just see it as little indicators and the pulse kind of checking of things, to say, okay, there's just I can't work it out yet. There's something going on over here. Let's just, gently approach this and start to work out how we could kind of, think of ways to improve it. And I also think, in terms of when you ask when is the right time, so I think it's quite important to have a blended approach to how you're asking. So your 24/7 is one approach, and then you've got your structured ones as another approach, and then there's something that's the anecdotal one-to-ones and the water cooler moments, and there's all sorts of different ways of asking at different times. But if the leaders have been, or the managers have been trained that is really important, to keep listening and then feeding it back in somehow, then you're getting a much more complex, sophisticated set of some quantitative data and then some qualitative data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to pick up on that, on something you mentioned about segmentation. Just another prompt that if anyone does have any questions that they would like asked at the end of this, then please do get them in over LinkedIn or on the Zoom using the Q&A there.
Lots of difficult ones, please.
Yeah, loads. Just none for me.
Matt, for
yeah,
Matt.
All for Matt. Okay, yeah. Cool. Yeah, all for Matt. You're asking for it. So Lisa, you said about one-to-ones, and I think that brings up another really interesting point about the segmentation. And when we're speaking to our companies and our teams, are seeing them as like a collection of individuals as opposed to one big homogenous group. Like, how important is that
It's critical.
Yeah.
It's critical, and that's why the kind of data that you're gathering is from one data point at a time, and then collating it together to find the trends and the the information that you need to kind of apply it to business strategy. But it is so human beings are so complex, and a lot of what they're doing in the workplace has been influenced by what's happening everywhere else out of the workplace. And we all know every single day that we have is different, with friends and family and health and various other points. So the one-to-ones it's crucial, and it's even more important in the industries where it's not very comfortable. So in some of the manufacturing, engineering, more technical, but less service industry, less creative and services industry, you do that in these types of environments as a matter of course. It's of course we do. We're extroverted people. We thrive off other socializing. It's the opposite in lots of other environments, when actually the individuals are most comfortable not making eye contact, not talking to anyone, getting to their machine and then tinkering away with whatever it is that they're doing, and on the shop floor or whatever it may be, on the lab on the lab bench or whatever. So it's even more important there, and there's skill sets that need to be developed or hired in, and more attention needs to go on it and invested in it.
But then also that has you mentioned that people who come in, get on the machine, sort of tinker away, and then that. I think there's a perception of some industries, and it's manufacturing being one, but then also on a different level, like you look at people like maybe software developers or something who are super, super in demand talent, but there is a bit of a perception of like, well, those guys like just being left to it. They're like, and that's it. And, you know, they don't want to be taught to, they want to work their own hours and do all that. But we know that gathering this data makes them feel included and makes them feel more loyal, maybe not the right word, but more included and more appreciated by the business. And going back to something you said before about like, you know, the needs, the hierarchy of needs that people, that'd be great to hear, you know, you just talk a little bit about that again.
Being heard is a universal need that we all have. And that is different to whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert. If someone's an introvert or an extrovert, that's going to vary how you might organize an event. But it doesn't mean the basic human things around being heard. So if the top driver, just to geek out a little bit, the top driver of happiness in every country is positive relationships, that from an employee experience perspective. So positive relationships. One of the key drivers of positive relationships is something called energetic connections. Now, energetic connections is what we're getting now from being on this podcast or whatever, but we're a self-selected group because we've come on the podcast. Lots of people you might have invited might have said, no, I'm not coming on that. Going on a podcast is my worst nightmare. But it doesn't mean that those people don't need energetic connections. And I'll bring it back to your point around engineers. A lot of my employees are developers, engineers, that sort of profile. Some of them like to come to physical events and some don't. But it just means you need to work hard to work out what those people want to do. A classic example would be in our organisation, and this might freak some people out, but we replaced the Christmas party with a winter festival that didn't have alcohol and was between the times of 10 and 3 o'clock. And the reason we did that is we're trying to make it as inclusive for everyone. Because if you've got to do the school drop, or you don't drink, because sometimes always, I actually don't drink myself, but some people might assume that is for certain reasons. It could be for religious, could be for health reasons. Nobody knows unless I tell them why I've done that. So going back to the point, going back to Lisa's point, it doesn't replace good management, which is understanding your people, and whatever their personality and their role, that's going to be different from person to person. Does that?
Yeah, it does. And it brings me on a little bit to, again, we were speaking about this before, but we've been doing a little bit of our own research over the last few months. And one of the questions that we've asked in that is, what are people's priorities outside of compensation, because that it muddies the water a little bit, but what are people's priorities when it comes to a job? What is most important to them? And we've asked our respondents to rank them one way, and we split that in between the sectors we operate in, which is life science, medical devices, and industrial, which there's a lot of similarities in terms of the overlap, but then they're quite different, and some of the differences were really, really interesting. So, you know, all three of them, going back to the needs ranked, flexibility and sort of work-life balance is number one, which points to me as the fact that it is prioritizing those relationships that we preserve.
We talked about this a little bit, like the debate that gets discussed in public, it tends to be, should people work from the office or should they work from home? And that gets all the airtime, whether it's Elon Musk or whatever that conservative guy is that always saying everyone needs to be in the office or they should be shot. But what the data shows is some people want to work from home, some people want to work from the office, some people want hybrid. I personally myself prefer hybrid, like I like a bit of both. But what we know is pretty much everyone wants flexibility, and that can go into different sectors as well, because sometimes people think again, because they confuse it with the office. If you take a security guard as an example, they can't work from home because they've got to be on that checkpoint or securing that building or whatever it is. But you can give them flexibility, for example, to swap shifts with someone else so they can be at their child's birthday party. So thinking really hard about what flexibility is absolutely important. And that's just life, isn't it? That just means people talk about work and life balance. We even talk about it in the model. I started more to use work-life harmony, because that's what that's everyone. We all need to work, other than the people that don't, from a monetary perspective. The rest of us need to work for money, so it's good that you've taken that out. That's a reality. People should go and get paid a good wage for what they do. But outside of that, we need to be able to flex our work lives and that whole thing all around it. And that's why people want it. But they also want it because it's not readily available. Lisa works with lots of companies that are really forward-thinking, and we were talking about it and Lisa was saying, oh, it just seems obvious that people should have flexibility. I know loads of CEOs that don't think it's obvious. They still don't get it. And this is where the data is important, because that is there, isn't it? If you're going out to hire talent and retain talent, that data is there staring you in the face. And there's going to be a cost to ignoring that.
Yeah. No, it's true. And as well, it's important that sort of, to explain it, is flexibility, and that can exist in all roles, because sometimes in a manufacturing environment, there could be just a blanket, well, the shop floor can't do that. And admin can, if you like. And then all that does is cause them and us even more so, and friction. And so it does need almost, the more attention needs to go on, how could it be flexible? Okay, it can't be remote on a shop floor, but how could it be flexible on a shop floor so that it doesn't put any rifts in the culture, put any kinks in it, if you like.
Yeah, and so you don't create literally an upstairs downstairs type situation, isn't it, where you're going, we are all on the same team and pulling from the same.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying everyone pulling towards the same goal, but
all I was going to say is, again, on your point on diversity and recruitment, if you don't fix things like flexibility, you're going to end up recruiting the same people over again, because the whole world of work has been designed around one person who doesn't have commitments at home to look after children.
Yeah. That's
the reality of it. If you check out, I'd recommend all the listeners to Google Jess Hegren. I think it's Heagren, and it's a report called Careers After Babies. And the stats in there are they're amazing to read, really. So 97% of women that have a baby want to return to work, but many can't, because the world of work isn't flexible enough. So the amount of talent that is going out of the world of work, and we're just talking about babies at this point. There's loads of other factors in the workforce that need to be fixed. But that's just one point, isn't it? Like, if you can't flex that around that, you're losing absolute talent out of the door. And it's just, I find it crazy that people will just stay with this like thing of being rigid when they can see all this data. There's so much cost to not being flexible.
Yeah.
And that could be someone who, whatever you might qualify for your maternity or paternity, you might have had to work for a company for a certain amount of time. But that is still your talent strategy as well. That future-proofing against that, not having to just react where you go like, oh, hang on, this has now happened, right? Well, they want to come back, but we can't. Well,
exactly.
It's actually thinking ahead of it. And if you're a smaller business, you might not have the time and energy and resource of all of this amazing things to create a hugely detailed HR strategy, but you can future-proof these things, can't you, and think about these things.
Yeah, and it's working out that this investment up front of the difficult decisions of how we do flex and do this, how that actually benefits in the long term, the return on investment of that thinking up front and ever evolving. So since COVID, employers have had to flex enormously, and they're still doing so now, because you kind of go through stages of coming back, and okay, everyone's pretty much back now, but now we're sort of seeing the fallout of if there's too much remote, or if, like you're saying, if you just say, oh yeah, a software developer can do remote, so they will do remote, and we won't even try to lure them back for some human connections and positive relationships, then you start to see now the fallout of that. So it just never changes. It's ever evolving, really.
It is. It's really interesting, and I think that we are now going to move into the Q&A.
Have we got any tough ones?
We've had a few coming in. Yeah, tough stuff. First one's on culture.
Oh no.
So how can you really showcase your culture throughout the recruitment process?
I think that you probably are better to answer this than me, to be honest, but I do think that businesses, especially SME businesses, do not focus enough on any of their the socials. They're quite good at focusing on the internal culture and the people that are there who are happy and thriving, and they, there's lots of photos of, nights out and whatever it may be. But I don't think the website often has as much of a part to play as it should. Because people will just check out your website straight away, and I don't think the effort goes into the products, the services, and anything that brings in a revenue, and not as many companies focus on things that are going to bring in a recruit. So I do think that you could really just start there simply with putting an awful lot more effort into the section of your website that has everything to do with recruitment, and then make that very, very real, and it's got to be, I hate the word authentic, but it is a word that is correct in that it has to, what you see as a perception online has to completely translate the minute you walk into that office. So from reception, people walking past and saying, "Are you okay? Can I get your coffee? Is someone looking after you?" All the things that happened here when we came here do not happen everywhere. So there's no point it being totally incongruous, and what you saw and what you get are totally different. So I think that showcasing, but in a kind of consistent way, and that a lot of the work we do with Culco is, we call it employee journey mapping. But basically it's from the point when they don't know your company, and then do all the way through, hopefully to long service, and kind of all those good things, and mentoring the people coming in. And I think it's great when you're in an interview stage as well, if you kind of are showing people around and they do half a day in the office, and you have the people that work there, not just the interviewers who are kind of, working with them at that point. They've got to see the real picture. They've got to see under the bonnet, basically.
Yeah, obviously employer brand is what we're talking about there, and it's a whole different topic and something that we could do a whole other webinar on. But just from my perspective on that, I think I completely agree. There's I'm not going to. We're very lucky. We're in a lovely setup here with lots of lovely cameras and microphones, and it's great. But there is something to be said for something that is a little bit quicker and often easier to make, whereby people are showing off their culture, and it's people want to see themselves, don't they? And people want to see themselves in a business. And you mentioned nights out on the website, but then to go back to your point, Matt, like you had your winter festival and not your Christmas do, because you don't want to show off the fact that every month we go out and get wrecked, because that's not the type of business that we are. And if you have got, if the big picture of on your one careers page on your website is your team of 30 people and everyone's got a glass of champagne in their hand, then that's the perception. It's like, oh, that is how we have fun. Yep. We all get hammered. Yep. I completely agree. Did you have anything to add to that?
I just got 3 words, which I think is really simple. I don't like the term hack, but for me, this is the simplest hack here, which is publish your data. Because when friends say to me, I'm going for an interview, and they say, "Oh, when you get asked, you've got to ask a question," I always just say, ask the interviewer how happy they are, ask them how their team is, and ask them for their cultural data. Because a company that has a good culture will say, "Oh yeah, I'll send you something. I'll send you the report." So publish your data. If you're collecting this data on how people feel, going back to Lisa's point, and it is a great culture, you'll have the data to prove it. So if you're going to be saying stuff on your website about this is a great place to work, or we've got happy employees, you better be backing it up with data, because otherwise it's just a statement. It's like I bet now if we could build a bit of an AI tool to just search how many companies say our people are our greatest asset. I don't know what the search results will be, but it will be a lot. My response to all that is prove it. How are you proving that? Because the only way to do that is publish your data.
That's a great. It is a good hack. I get your opposition.
I'm never going to use a hack again. That's the last time I use it.
Another question we've had come in is, what is the best way of rolling out a survey system for reluctant employees?
Okay, 100% of employees are reluctant. Let's start from that point. Has anyone in the world ever got a survey and thought, "Oh yes, I've got a survey"?
Fist pump moment.
Everyone's reluctant. And I say this as someone who owns a survey company at its core.
Yeah.
So you have to start with that assumption. Nobody is going to get that email or that WhatsApp or however it's deployed and go, "Yes, we've got this survey." So all survey programs will fail. It has to become a way of life. And that's where people like Lisa come in. You have to build a program that it just makes it part of the DNA. One of the crazy things about happiness is that getting feedback is actually important to your own happiness. So that's the whole like circle of it. Feedback is important both ways. So you have to bring it into the DNA and you have to take it seriously. So there is an assumption that there's reluctant employees. I'm a reluctant employee to fill out a survey, but there is also a myth that there's something called feedback fatigue, where if you send out too many surveys, people won't fill them in. What it actually is something called action fatigue. So reluctant employees, which I actually think 100% of employees are, they won't fill them out unless leadership is showing they're acting on the data.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you do that, and it has to be something really small, but once you show, what's that sitcom at the moment about that American football?
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. If you watch the first episode, go and watch it. But basically, he actually does a survey on Post-its, and what he finds is there's a leak in the shower, and he fixes the shower, and then the players start thinking, oh, actually, maybe he cares about us. So that is obviously a comedy program. But again, it's that you're showing employees those things that are important to them are important to you. Otherwise, you're in your ivory tower. And that's where all this stuff becomes really powerful.
And that's when people start getting the birthday cakes. And they're not forgotten about
Yeah.
They get the showers fixed.
So, I agree. People are fundamentally, especially if culture is not something that you focused on previously. So it kind of, or you have and not well. And so it kind of, you're starting from a minus point. We're kind of quite naturally cynical and skeptical, and so I think you've got to sort of quick wins, build it up, keep the momentum going, constant sort of energy with it. I just think it's not easy, and it's something that you just have to keep working at, and that's what I was going to say. The kind of focus on what's in it for them. Like, why totally. Am I doing this? Am I doing this for you, or am I doing this, because there will be some benefit for me or my team or my family or whatever it may be.
Just on that, the amount of times I hear, like, we'll get a new business inquiry, and why do you want to do it? Oh, because we want to win an award. This is not a chicken and egg conversation. You do it because you want to create a better culture, better company, and the outcome will be better awards. It's the amount of people I meet that they want to do it to win an award. If you tell your employees that's why you want to do it, they're not going to fill out the survey. And then you have to do that thing, right? Everyone has to fill it out by Friday at 6:00, or they're not going to blah, 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 blah. Like, awards will come if you've got a great culture. It's just start with the culture, and the awards will happen. Don't do it to win awards.
Yeah. This is a really interesting question, quite a big one. But I think from a cultural perspective, particularly, Lisa, like, how would you define being a flexible employer? Because I think there's a perception, that's what we're zooming out, but I think there's a perception that it means that I can start at 10 and I can finish at 6.
Yeah, I guess it's got to be, it's got to go back to the data. So you've got to find out what your workforce mean by the word flexible. And you need to have that whole gamut of information from the very little to the very large bits of flexibility. And then there'll be an area in the middle that is actually possible. You've got to think of your business outcomes and your business output and your objectives. So the kind of the balance is, can we achieve the majority of this for the majority of our people and still achieve our business outcomes? And then if we, as is probable, you cannot do the whole gamut, something that somebody might want that is, you just think, really, this is just not, that's not even working. You won't even be working if you go to this level of flexibility. We need to, whatever is not possible, or maybe not possible now, we need to communicate really well. We need to explain what factors we took into consideration, and what the majority of people wanted to do, and what was commercially viable, and then say, therefore, we can apply these things. And maybe in the future, when we get to a larger size and we've got, maybe it's covering work, covering roles or responsibilities, you may say, this time next year, if we do manage to achieve our growth plans and we get another 20% of extra people here, we think we can then move on to allowing this and this and this. So it's a lot to do with that two-way conversation with the workforce, I think.
That's really interesting, though, contextualising flexibility with what you can't be flexible on. I think that's a little bit, because I think
what you can't now.
Yeah. But I think that's it, because people are so keen to always give good news and always talk about the positives. But it's actually there's always that question hanging in the air as to, well, hang on, they didn't do the thing I said.
Yeah, the more communication you give about your business and how it works and why things aren't possible, people are reasonable and rational on the whole. So if you say to them, this, if you maybe have not thought that if we did do that, this will be the consequence for the business, and you can see that's not viable, and they're like, oh, do you know what? I've never thought of that. That's a fair point. I understand. It's just communication. I mean, I say just communication. That's a whole nother webinar. It's really hard to get communication strategy right. But I think that honesty of kind of why we made this business decision, that most people would go, okay, I get it. Fair enough. I'll move on from that suggestion,
Absolutely. Do you have anything you want to...
Just to pick up on your point, Kris, around if I had to rate the CEOs of our customers, which I'm not going to do live on this podcast.
That would be incredible.
Yeah,
wow.
Number one. The ones that perform the best in terms of looking after their employees do exactly what you were just both talking about there, which is the way I always look at it. Unless you're breaking child labour laws, which you shouldn't be, and if you are listening, you are, that's a serious problem you need to sort out.
It's big bad now.
It's big bad. But every one of your employees, 100% of your employees is an adult. So everything that they deal with at work, they also deal with at home. They have their own P&L, they have bills to pay, they have all these challenges, family issues, all this kind of stuff. So a CEO saying these are the things we can and can't do is totally normal. But some people veer away from that, and what they do is the opposite to what Lisa was saying, is they don't communicate. And that's what, again, I'm going to use a film reference. You know that like Tom Cruise film, like You Want the Truth, You Can't Handle the Truth, with Jack Nicklaus. Your employees can handle the truth. What they can't stand is just silence. Because where silence happens, rumours fill the void. So if something's happening, let's say there's an announcement out in the press of your company, and the CEO or the team don't come out and say what's happening, people just fill the narrative themselves. And that could be good, it could be bad. So you just have to get out there and at Lisa's point, you're so right. That's a whole nother webinar on communications, but it's such a simple thing to do, just to keep people updated on what you can and can't do.
It's interesting. Look, we've got just over 5 minutes left. So I'm going to do one more question, then I'll ask you both for one piece of sort of practical advice for people to take away from them. So I'll let you think about that. But how can we be more emotionally intelligent as a business? So this seems to be the key.
I would say the number one thing to do is be sitting with your team and asking them what's important to them. So like I've shared today, like some of the top drivers of happiness would be feelings of acknowledgement, positive relationships, psychological safety, and freedom to take opportunities. They're the top 4 drivers of happiness. Sit down and ask your team which ones are the most important to them.
But you can tick all those 4 boxes with one conversation as well, can't you? Actually, it does itself.
Yeah. So all I would say is just keep getting in that habit of making space in the time, not just to discuss the workload, the recruitment jobs you got to get out, all this kind of stuff. Just, it's, when people pass each other in the corridor and say, oh, how are you? And no one really waits for the answer. Just make time to actually ask, get into the detail of like, what is important to you at work?
Mm-hmm. Great. Same question.
I think it's a big question, really. But I do completely agree with Matt. It's the being personal bit. It is actually just getting to know your individuals in your team really, really well, and that dynamic, and then having the mechanisms to somehow collate and feed that back to the people who are going to be making the decisions on kind of what we do next. It isn't an easy one, but I think it's, rather than shy away as the elephant in the room, it's to sit down with people like you guys and sort of say, well, we can gather the data. It's not impossible to gather this type of data and then do something with it to make it meaningful. So it exists out there. The happiness index is a really good example of that. And I think that should be the focus, as opposed to some surveys, which people, when we talked about them being sceptical, they're sceptical because sometimes they are contrived to produce results that somebody wants to hear, or to have some blame in there to do with leadership and management and what isn't happening and is happening. And it shouldn't be, those types of surveys should be to do with how they're feeling, and then you are gathering the emotional intelligence. So yeah, that's what I feel.
Yeah. No, superb. Well, look, thank you very much for your time. As I say, I'm going to finish with just asking you both for one piece of advice that people can take away. Just on, it doesn't have to necessarily be very much in the nuts and bolts of this topic, but just anything generally that you'd like to let our audience know. But thank you very much for your time. And Matt, go on, what's your golden nugget of wisdom people can take away with them?
I won't say what our sales director would want me to say, which is go to thehappinessindex.com and book a demo. But what I would say, the saying, curiosity killed the cat. Like, that isn't true in business. I just say stay really curious. Like, I don't think there's anything more interesting than other human beings, and just make time to find out about them. And it links back to what we were saying before, but just stay curious and find out all the stuff that's going on, and what makes people tick in your organization. And what you will find is, by finding out that about other people, one, you'll realize you've got more in common than you think, and two, your relationships will become stronger because you'll find out stuff that you can connect on. So just be really curious.
Yeah, great. Lisa?
I suppose I kind of just think I know lots of business owners who avoid this subject because they feel like it's going to open Pandora's box. And I would just kind of say, be brave, and methodically you can approach this in a really safe way with people who know how to kind of help and guide you, so that you can proactively, because we've all got a culture in our businesses. It's just whether it's the one we want, whether it's a toxic one, whether it's a nourishing one, I suppose. So I'd just say, be bold and invest the time and commit to structuring and creating and kind of crafting a really good culture program, because the kind of peripheral benefits are endless, the positives that come from doing so. And conversely, the risks are immense if you don't. Yeah, great. Well, look, both of you, thanks so much for your time. I think the big takeaway for me from all this is that embracing data doesn't have to be a big scary thing that we think it is, which is going to be highly complex and needs a PhD to be able to use. It can be as simple as having a one-to-one conversation. It can be as simple as checking what people want to be paid, what people are interested in before you offer them that job. There's 3 people here who'd be delighted to help you with that as well in the future. Yeah. But look, if you've watched this, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Please join the Bring It In community. It's been fantastic to have these 2 brilliant guests with us today. Until next time, thanks a lot and goodbye.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, thanks.